The ability to remember is not something that you're naturally born with. Even the people you know who are the best at remembering stuff, there are techniques that they use, whether they know it or whether they don't know it. So I said all of that to let you know that if you have trouble remembering stuff, it's because the technique that you've been using your whole life is probably a weak technique. So I've done my research, and today we're going to go deep on which techniques you can use to remember more effectively. And there are a lot of techniques, so you can choose from the bunch. There are 6. So technique number 1, this is probably the one that everyone knows because it's so popular, and if you don't know about this one, then I don't know what you've been doing. Maybe you haven't been studying effectively. It's called active reading. Active reading involves engaging with the material by asking questions, making predictions, and summarizing as you go. And when I said asking questions, you're asking yourself the questions. For example, when you're reading a book that you don't understand, highlight the key words and ask yourself the questions about what you're reading. For example, you're like, I'm reading about this. Okay, let's say it's menstruation and ovulation and that stuff. Day 7, if this happens, then what happens on day 14? What happens on day 21? You're asking yourself questions, and then when you read, you find those answers to those questions. It's like now you're generally curious about what you're reading, and you're not being forced to study ovulation and menstruation and all this stuff. And one thing that you may find also is that within these techniques, you may also find other techniques in the techniques. So for example, my personal favorite when it comes to active reading, people may do it differently, so I found my own way that works best for me, is when you're reading something that you don't understand, you take that whole passage that you don't understand, and then you summarize it in your own words. For example, you read a paragraph when you're reading maybe geography, bio, whatever that you're reading. You take a paragraph, you read it, and then when you're done, you take a piece of paper, or maybe in your book, then you write down what you understood from that paragraph in your own words, in simple terms. And I used to do this a lot, and it worked very great for me, especially when I couldn't remember exactly what was in the book. I would remember my understanding. For example, you're reading about cellular respiration or whatever that you're reading about, DNA replication. I did sciences, so that's the only thing that I can talk about. I can talk about anything else. You may use real life examples, analogies, and real life situations to help you understand better. And I used to do this a lot because science is tricky, so you have to find a way for you to understand. An example that I always use, you may say the mRNA leaves the cell through the pores, which is the door, and then goes on a journey to the ribosome to meet with its mother. And then the tRNA, the mother, brings the little brother to meet with the mRNA to form the polypeptide chain. That's a more easier way to put it. And when you're in the examination, you may not remember exactly all the facts about what happened in the DNA replication, what happened to form the polypeptide chain, but what you remember for sure is that the mRNA leaves through the door and then goes to the ribosome, and then its mother brings the little brother. You may remember that. So even if you can't remember something in the examination, your own understanding of what you just read will help you understand better and help you remember sort of exactly what happened, and then you won't get 0, bro. For sure you won't get 0. And the second technique is called visualization. And when I say visualization, I'm not talking about this spiritual EBGB stuff, because you may be like, visualization, I thought we were talking about education now, bro. I need to go now. Then you click off the video. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about studying a technique from the book called Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua 4. Visualization. So visualization involves creating mental images or scenarios in your mind to remember the content better. So for example, I've actually caught one of my teachers doing this in grade 9. He was a history teacher, and he was trying to teach us about the fight for independence and fighting oppression and all that stuff. So what he was doing is, he was not actually teaching, he was trying to remember what happened in the battle and trying to make us understand. And the way that he did it, he was not explaining the facts to it. He almost like explained it like a movie. And the whole point is that these teachers, the way they remember things for so long is that they don't remember what they read, because they may have read something that happened a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago when they were still in school. So the way they remember things is by visualization. They watch a whole scene in their mind, like they're watching a movie. You may see your teacher just standing there, just thinking. They're not trying to remember the facts, they're trying to remember the movie, the mental movie that happened. And then from that movie, they derive the facts. And the way my teacher remembered this stuff is by creating a whole mental movie in his mind and going into that mental theater and watching the whole movie of the indigenous people fighting the colonial soldiers, and then people rebelling, prisoners just escaping and fighting back. For example, Martin Luther King, we all have this example in real life, bro. A young man who comes and leads the people to fight oppression or whatever. In your mind, your duty is to make it like a movie, to create these whole scenarios. So whenever you're asked a question about that whole thing, in your mind, what you go back to is that scene in your mind, like a movie. People don't forget movies that easily, right? they're more memorable. So what you have to do if you're watching something that you can make a movie out of is to make it a movie for you to remember more easily. And I've done this many times, be it in science, be it in geography, whatever that I'm learning, bro. As long as I can make a movie out of it, best believe I'm making a movie. Now, technique number 3, the Feynman technique. And you may be like, who's Feynman? What is the Feynman technique? It's from the book called Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman by Richard P. Feynman. So this technique involves explaining a concept in simple language as if you're teaching it to somebody else. This process highlights areas of weak understanding and simplifies complex ideas. You know the old saying, if you can't explain it, then you probably don't understand it. That's exactly what the Feynman technique is based on. For example, someone from the medical field may be explaining something to somebody who studies arts. And you know, something from the medical field is very difficult to understand, especially if you can't even visualize whatever that you're learning about. If you don't know how it looks like, if you don't know whatever they're mentioning, the labels, everything. So it's very hard. But if you're able to explain and make somebody understand who doesn't even know what you're talking about, who can't even see an image in their mind, then you truly understand whatever that you're doing. For example, I may be explaining the role of mitochondria to somebody who doesn't even do sciences, and I'll explain it like this. Mitochondria is like this ball of energy. It's like a power plant that gives you electricity. And in their mind, I've painted this image of, okay, it's a ball of energy, a power plant, which gives you electricity, which means it gives you energy. So whenever they think of mitochondria, they think of a ball of energy giving you electricity. Now, the 4th technique is called spaced repetition. Spaced repetition involves reviewing information at increasing intervals to exploit the psychological spacing effect. But I'm going to put my own twist to it to make it more effective, 10 times more effective. For example, let's say that you know that examinations are about to come soon, and then you're like, you know what? This time is going to be different. This time I'm going to be smart about it, and I'm going to start preparing early. I'm going to start studying early and make sure that by the time the examination comes, I'm going to be ready. And then let's say today, this is the week that you're studying, and then the examination is in like 4 weeks. Then you're like, okay, it's a Saturday. I'm going to spend the whole day, 10 hours of the day, hammering this concept into my brain and making sure that it never leaves, so that by the time the examination comes, I'll be good. Congratulations, bro. You've just screwed yourself over. Because that's why the whole concept of spaced repetition exists. Because humans, we tend to forget things, bro. No matter how much time you spend cramming, you can never retain that information over a long period of time. Why do you think teachers don't recommend cramming? That's called cramming. And what you're doing it the complete opposite way, bro. You don't cram early. You cram the day before the examination so it never leaves your mind. But if you're cramming early, it means you're just screwing yourself over, bro. So what you would rather do is to spend 1 or 2 hours a day hammering that concept into your mind, but every other day. Like, let's say you cram today, you skip tomorrow, you cram again tomorrow, you skip, you cram, skip, cram, to make sure that it actually never leaves. And at that point, you're not cramming, you're just hammering the information into your brain. It's like engraving, etching the information into your brain so that it never leaves. You know, like when people write their names on trees. Imagine you do that each and every year. It will never leave. But if you do that in 1989, by the time it's 2024, of course it will still be like visible, but then at the same time it won't really be visible. So you want to be doing that each and every year. In our case, you want to be studying and hammering the information into your brain throughout the week, not just one time and then 4 weeks later the examination comes. Bro, you're screwing yourself over. And I'm laughing because I'm talking from experience, bro. I've also done this, bro, like studying early and then you're like, okay, I'm good for the whole term. Examination comes, screwed. And then technique number 5, interleaving practice. It's from a book called Make It Stick, The Science of Learning by Peter C. Brown and his other fellow accomplices. So the technique interleaving practice involves mixing different topics, but related topics or types of problems during study sessions, like exactly what math problems do. They mix a bunch of questions and then they expect you to remember it. So if you do pure math, you may know exactly what I'm talking about. There are some techniques that you may find hard to differentiate between. You may not know which formula to use, on which occasion, and on which problem. So what you may do is that you may find your teacher mixing different topics whenever you do maybe practice questions or whatever. They mix different questions so that you're able to differentiate between which formula to use on which questions. So whenever you're studying, do the same thing. Study different topics, mix the topics that you find hard to differentiate between. For example, algebra, geometry, stats. Mix all those things if you have trouble differentiating between those two. This approach helps develop better discrimination between problem types and fosters a deeper understanding of each topic. That's exactly what examinations do also. You might find that in an examination, they'll put all these questions that seem alike. And then by the end of the day, you need to use different formulae. So you may use the wrong formula to solve the wrong problem. You know what I mean? So you may also want to practice that whenever you're studying. Mix whatever the problems you're practicing so that in the examination, you are not shocked and you're like, what the hell? What am I supposed to do here? You know exactly what to do. With the whole point being, you won't forget which formula to use on which problem. Because with all of this, we're trying not to forget. So, yeah. Now the last technique, it's called SQ3R method. Now I don't know what the hell this is talking about, but I'm sure all of us have probably done this before. It's called the SQ3R method because it consists of 3 R's, and what it stands for is survey, question, read, recite, and review. It's a systematic approach to reading that enhances comprehension and retention. Now, to make you understand better, for example, now the reason why I said everyone has probably done this before is because when you're reading the survey, what does it stand for? Survey basically means you may be studying geography or whatever that you're studying, bio, and your teacher says, guys, open to page 71, and then you open on page 71, and what you immediately do is to scan the topics. Each heading, you go over it and say, okay, first heading, second heading, third heading. Okay, this is the most interesting one. You go on the next page, page 72, you scan the headings. You go on the next page again, page 73, these are the headings. And what you're doing right there is called surveying. That's why I've said everyone has done it before, because we've all done it, bro. And then once you survey the topics and the subheadings, the next phase that everyone naturally does is you ask yourself questions about what you've read. For example, you may see the topic, trees in West Africa grow to the left. And you may be like, why to the left? And it's not a fact, I'm just saying. They grow to the left, and the ones in the north grow to the right. You may start asking yourself, why does this happen? And then when that happens, you may hear a teacher saying, Jane, please read page 71 for us. And when that person reads the topic that you're asking yourself questions about, now you get all the answers that you wanted. And then when they say recite and review, they mean that whatever that you just heard, all the answers that you've gotten, recite them in your mind and relate them to the questions that you had. For example, you were like, why do the trees grow to the right or to the left? And then you give yourself the answer. It's because of the sun. So whichever way the sun goes, the tree will grow towards, because it's chasing the sun. You're basically making yourself understand better, and reviewing the notes is basically what I said, trying to get a better understanding. So the SQ3R method is something that we probably do without even knowing, and it's something that you may want to continue doing, bro. Because if it works, it works. Why fix something that's not broken? Continue using it. And also on top of that, you may mix 2 study techniques together to make them more effective. For example, the SQ3R method and active reading. For that, it worked for me. And you may also find whatever that works for you. Create your own combination. And before I leave, one thing that I want to say is that if you're able to maximize your learning, if you're able to use that as your secret weapon, as your superpower, then bro, you've basically completed life. So whatever that you can do to maximize your learning, do it, bro. And with that being said, I've also changed the community name from DC to the 7th Kingdom. So with that being said, welcome to the 7th Kingdom. Give your heart and the world is yours to conquer. Take care.